you know, we had the same person's license used for both Zooms, so that's why we got started just a few minutes late here. So, and then a couple of us staff, of course, we're rushing over virtually to to make this meeting. So, anyway, well, I think I'll just wait just a second here to get started. We have an hour today to have this meeting about the modal planning elements of the draft rules. And I don't know how many people we had sign up or anything like that. So I think we'll just wait a second here and go ahead and just jump in real quick. I have just a handful of slides just to kind of initiate us and kind of get us started and say what exactly we're talking about. And then we'll go ahead and just get into open discussion. So let's see here. I'm going to go ahead and jump in. So today we're going to just do some real quick introductions. We'll talk real quick the issues and the kind of the scope of the work that we want to talk about in this work group. And then, like I said, have an open discussion. On staff, DLCD again, my name is Bill Holmstrom. I'm the Land Use and Transportation Planning Coordinator for the agency. And along with Kevin Young, one of the co-managers of the rulemaking effort. Along with me, we have Cody Meyer on the line. Let's see who else. Casaria Taylor, Evan Manville, and we also have Brian Hurley, who's staff at ODOT, joining us today. And we may have some other people popping in and out here. Like I said, we just ended another meeting, so it may be that that some other people pop in along the way. Just one issue. I did have an internet drop in the middle of the last meeting, so I missed some of the last meeting. Hopefully that does not happen here. But if I just go away, then I'm sure Cody or someone will just pick up where I left off. I appreciate that. So let's just go ahead and real quick and do introductions. I'll just point at you and you just introduce yourself real quick. Rob, Steve, Julie.
I'm Rob Interfeld, Transportation Planning Manager for the City of Eugene.
I'm Steve Kelly, Transportation Planner with Washington County.
Julie Warnicki, Transportation Planning Manager with the City of Salem.
Great, thank you. Carl, Mary, Kyle, Sarah.
Carl McNair, Transportation Manager with City of Medford.
Mary Kyle McCurdy, 1000 Friends of Oregon.
Sarah Wright, Oregon Environmental Council.
And then Paige, people are jumping around. Paige, Elisa, and Wade.
Hi, Paige West. I'm the Senior Planner with Rogue Valley Transit District.
Hi, Elisa Chang from Ben Bikes. I was on the last CFA meeting, 4 hours of meetings, yay.
This one's only an hour long, so hopefully not.
And my name is Wade Elliott. I'm the Assistant Public Works Director for the City of Grants Pass.
Great, thank you. Joseph and Kari.
Hi, this is Joseph Off at the City of Hillsborough. I'm in the Transportation Systems Division that does the transportation planning.
And Kari, I think you just jumped on, but if you could just introduce yourself real quick.
Sure thing. Good morning. This is Kari Schlosshauer, she, her pronouns. I'm with the Safe Roads Partnership.
Great, thank you. Thank you everyone for joining us today, and especially folks who were on the last meeting too. I know it's quite the marathon for us. It's even more for you guys, so I appreciate the time. So yeah, real quick. Well, I just have a handful of slides. This is not going to be like a whole on presentation slideshow thing. Let me click on the right thing here. Like I said, this is an informal meeting to discuss ideas and concerns about the particular sections of rules having to do with modal planning. So folks are aware this meeting is being live streamed on YouTube to the millions of people out there who are watching, I'm sure, and also being recorded. So you can go back and sit back in your recliner tonight and rewatch all the greatest hits. We may schedule additional work group meetings if we feel like we need to do that, and that would probably be. I'm just looking at the calendar. It probably would be late December if we can, although I know it's difficult with the holidays. We're running out of time here, unfortunately. So the rules that we're talking about today are the modal rules, and it's in the draft transportation planning rules or Division 12, rules 500 through 830. And the first set of rules are in the 500s, and those have to do with pedestrian planning. And I always like to make sure that I'm clear that when I talk about pedestrians, I talk about systems that are for people who walk or using mobility devices. Rules the 600 series of rules, which have to do with bicycle planning. And again, I like to always be clear because people get excited about bicycles sometimes. It's not just bicycles, electric bikes, scooters, and other types of mobility devices that kind of operate at that speed and scale. Rule 630 has to do with bicycle parking in particular. The 700 series of rules having to do with public transportation planning, both within communities and inside cities, but also intercity transportation transit planning. Rule 750 is a little bit different. It has to do with transportation demand management. I threw it in here. I don't know that we're going to talk about it much today, though, unless people really want to. And then our streets and highways planning rules, which are the 800 series, and including Rule 830, which talks about how to authorize projects that increase capacity. I would say most of when we polled people for which work groups they're interested in, and pedestrian and bicycle received the most. I mean, not the most altogether. CFAs did for that, but it was the most out of all the modes that we pulled for separately. So I expect I'm going to hear a lot about that today. Just in general, what we're trying to get at with this planning and with transportation system plans in general is we're trying to update them to make sure that they're going to meet our climate and equity objectives. We need to make sure that we're centering the voices of underserved populations when we're just making decisions about our land use and transportation systems, that we're working to meet the targets that have been set out for us that we know we need to meet our climate pollution, which connect directly to vehicle miles traveled. Where this comes in is where we really need to talk about the other modes of travel, of getting around. It's not just driving around for so many reasons other than climate inequity, but those in particular. With this rulemaking, we need to shift, how much of our transportation system is focused on moving people in cars. So not excluding that, but we need to do both. We want to make sure our rules are clear, that they're coordinated with other planning work, and that we're avoiding unnecessary duplication, or that we're reinventing the wheel. Doing TSPs over and over again, doing the same thing, it doesn't really do anyone any good. The issues that I identified, that I'd heard, that these are kind of the key ones, and I'm sure there's a whole host of other ones that we'll talk about here in a little bit, but heard a lot of comments about bicycle facilities, and that we may not be going far enough in our rules. Brian may have to step in a few times here. We've had quite a bit of discussion with the Department of Transportation about what we can and can't do there, or should or shouldn't do there. But happy to have that discussion today. We've heard a lot about our Rule 830 and how we authorize capacity improving projects. Which projects get in seems to be a big one, kind of those thresholds, and I think we're absolutely open to having a discussion about that. What that process looks like, who has to do that, when has to be done, all up for debate. People, talked about the name of the streets and highways elements, and we can talk about whether or not it's the right name or not, if you want to, and of course other topics. And last time I had this meeting a couple of days ago on TSPs, people had all sorts of other topics. So I'm going to go ahead and stop my share now, and I think just open it up. We only have about 50 more minutes to discuss. Happy to, before we hit the lunch hour. So people would like to raise their hands virtually or otherwise. Happy to get this kicked off. Paige.
Yeah, one of the other topics that we've had is the multimodal nature that seems to be required for all the streets. And for example, I've suggested, I know others have too, that transit, being the large vehicle size that we are, sometimes does not operate best or even safely on corridors with high bicycle and pedestrian traffic. And so I'd like to see more flexibility with being able to have corridors or streets that are more higher bike use, and then streets that have higher transit use. I think pedestrians have more flexibility and could probably be accommodated on both of those corridors. But the idea of bundling everything together on every single street is a safety concern for me.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other comments or questions or other topics people would like to bring up?
Hi, Bill. This is Joseph from the city of Hillsborough. Can you clarify what sections of the, I mean, you mentioned something saying sections 500 to 800, which is a lot of sections, and I have a lot of comments on those. And are we focusing particularly on one section of those, or is this for all four of those sections?
So yeah, this work group is on modal planning, which is all four of those those modes. So yeah, we're covering everything. Like I said, I expect coming into this, there was a lot of we'd heard a lot of comment on and interest in having a meeting about bicycles in particular, I would say, and whether or not our standards are strong enough. That was the range of comments that we heard. And I'd say the other kind of big kind of spiky piece of this was around the 830 rule, around the authorizing the capacities, improving projects. I would say that's the other kind of piece where we've had the most that I've heard the most questions and comments about. But this meeting is supposed to cover kind of all four of them.
All right, I can dive into just the bicycle for now, and then dive in. I have strong concerns with 830, but we can dive into that later in the meeting.
Sure, that'd be great. Yeah.
But I also want to second what Paige was saying about the bicycle. I'm a big advocate of bicycling. I lived in Portland and I biked on the bicycle routes and everything. There's some things in the rule where I just feel like it's a little bit too much, though, where it was specifying that every time we have a development, we need to have a full bicycle locker that has to accommodate all form of bicycles and have 2 locking mechanisms. It was very, very detailed for the rule, and I guess the things I'm running into is that we want to make sure that we have walkable sidewalks in our community, and trying to squeeze a whole big huge bicycle locker mechanism when we're like in a Main Street downtown type of setting is going to be very challenging to do. And so just again, it's just like we like to achieve that. We can strive our best, but there needs to be some form of flexibility on that. And the other thing is just there's another thing in the rule about having the same number of bicycle spaces as motor vehicle parking spaces. And out where we live in City of Hillsborough, we have major employers such as Intel, who has parking garages based on the number of employees that are on the site, and just to try to match the number of bicycle parking spots with the number of motor vehicle parking spots are it's not reasonable. And so there just needs to be. I'm strongly for encouraging people bicycling. I love bicycling myself. But we need to have some form of flexibility. It's too right now a little bit too stringent.
Yeah, so I think you're talking about Rule 630 around bicycle parking. So I just want to clarify a few things, which I want to make sure that we're clear. We don't require bicycle lockers anyway. We require cover and secured bicycle parking. So that might be covered bike locks or something like that, or bike racks. And I'm happy to make tweaks to this rule. I've heard comments on this the other way too, just so you are aware that like we need to talk about showers and all sorts of other things. And I'm trying to walk a line here, and if I'm not hitting it quite right, that's fine. We can talk about that. In terms of that rule about requiring as many bicycle spaces, that's, to be clear, you have to allow or require as many bicycle spaces as there are required off-street parking spaces. So that may still not be you may still think that's too much, but we are making substantial changes to our requirements for how local governments may require or mandate off-street parking. So we expect that number to be much less than it is today in most places, or zero in many places. It may be that people build a lot more parking. If you're Intel and you're required to build a certain amount and they want to build a whole lot more, we would only require them to put as many bicycle parking spaces as that first number, as the required number of parking spaces. So I think that's clear, but I don't know, maybe that doesn't make you any happier, but that's that's what we had intended to do. And that's also a tool, I think, to try to rein in excessive off-street parking requirements.
And I just want to just be clear, just that we'd love to, we're kind of tied to what TriMet has for funding. I mean, we'd love to have more of the, people have access to transit, but we're really, in situations where we don't control the transit, it's hard for us to bring the transit out here so those people who work for Intel has alternative modes and besides driving a motor vehicle. So there's challenges that we face. And so I just wanted to have that understanding.
For sure. Yeah. And again, I think, the big picture is we're trying to look at a future where there's a lot more transit, where a lot more people are riding bicycles. And if we're not planning for that future now, we're planning for kind of the status quo, then we're not going to get there. So there's a line between like, are you guys pushing like some crazy thing here, or is it like this is really the kind of stuff that we're going to need for the future that we envision to happen? And we are, I think, when it comes to the 700 series of rules and planning for public transportation, we're trying to be clear that we understand there's a kind of a separation of who's responsible for what. The cities don't run the buses, collect the fares, determine where those routes go, stuff like that. Julie.
Well, like the previous speaker, I have like so many different comments. I'm not quite sure where to start, but since we started with bicycles, I'll touch on that. I guess I'm concerned about the requirement that cities must plan for separated or protected bike facilities on arterials and collectors in climate-friendly areas, in all climate-friendly areas. And so since I don't know exactly where our climate-friendly areas are going to be, I'm making the assumption in Salem that it's likely going to be downtown Salem is a pretty prime candidate. And given the built environment, and I don't see this as reasonable. We did a whole planning study around bicycle multimodal transportation in our core and identified sort of key facilities. I think you're aware of that study, but not absolutely every street. And the separated and protected part, one of the things that we have in Salem, and I'm guessing other jurisdictions, is we do not have the ability to sweep. Like if we had a separated curbed, bike facility, it's going to be full of debris. So that's one of my concerns. Switching quickly to the pedestrian section. There's an exemption for local streets where you don't have to have sidewalks on both sides because of topography, or other issues. I think that should be expanded, not just to local streets. We have places where we have, I'm using an example, we have an minor arterial that runs alongside, maybe it's major, alongside of I-5. There are no land uses that along the side of I-5. And so in that section, we do not have planned currently to have a sidewalk. And I don't think that there should be, I think there should be an allowance for exemptions to that. I guess I will pass on to somebody else. I also will have some things to say on the capacity increasing area in particular. I do not think an hour is enough time to delve into these sections.
Okay, thank you. Carl.
Thanks. I guess I agree that it's hard to know where to start. I'm going to talk about bike facilities, though. I think protected bike facilities are great, but I don't think that they are realistic on every arterial and collector in climate-friendly areas. A lot of these areas are going to be existing areas, like Julie pointed out, downtowns, where you have set right-of-ways and there's a lot of competing uses for that space. in Medford, we have a lot of driveways along some of our arterials and collectors in areas that would likely be climate friendly areas. And, you know, it just, there'd be so many gaps in the protection that it wouldn't really end up being a benefit. I guess I also think we need an exemption. We have for where you have a parallel facility that can reasonably provide the bike route for an arterial or a collector. We have a couple examples of those in Medford where we've planned for a nice multi-use path because of right-of-way constraints. And then finally, the thing I'll mention right now for pedestrian and bicycles is I'm concerned how the rules call for wider, more protected facilities in climate friendly areas as opposed to other areas, because it's kind of the bigger is always better thing. In my mind, the way it's written, maybe there's a different way to write it. I get that I get what it's getting at, but I also think that if a city wants to set its standard everywhere for separated, at least for new facilities, for separated bike facilities on these streets, then there shouldn't be a requirement to go further in those climate friendly areas if you want to do it in a broader geographic space. So
I think we've heard that comment before too, and I think that's right. We don't want to hold the rest of the city back because we're trying to do the right thing in climate friendly areas. It's been difficult to figure out a way to make sure that we have strong requirements in climate friendly areas when we're trying to avoid putting in dimensional numbers and things like that and say do X number of feet wide or something like that. So we're still trying to figure that out, and if people have ideas about that, to make sure that we're strong enough in these places in particular and everywhere else too, but without having that kind of comparative thing, I'm open to suggestions on that. Lisa.
Hi, I am one of the people that think that the bike rules do not go far enough. And I assume that in the rules where it says that you need to have separated and protected bike facilities on all arterials and climate friendly areas, that is because you would assume that arterials and collectors have a higher speed and more volume of traffic. And so I think that it should be explicitly said that if the speed of traffic is this and the volume of traffic is this, these are the facilities that you'll need. And you might not necessarily need it on every single arterial or every single street in general, but you should identify at least a key network of connecting bike facilities that will have a minimum standard of what the good protection and good facilities for those streets are, and that it should be dictated by the volume and the traffic specifically.
Well, that's a helpful idea. Thank you, Elisa. Rob.
Yeah, I guess I'm kind of building on a little bit on what Elisa said and what someone said earlier. So just going to 0610 number 2, where it says higher levels of protection and separation are necessary for bicycle facilities on higher speed and volume streets and highways such as arterials and collectors. Is that saying that jurisdictions will be required to build protected facilities on all arterials and collectors or all higher speed facilities?
So yeah, section 2 of that rule basically it lines out the different kinds of bicycle facilities that we expect to see in different places in the system, and then it's not really until section 3 later on where it says what you have to do in which place a little bit more specifically. Section 2 kind of starts out by saying you need higher levels of separation and protection in those places with higher speed and volume, and maybe we just need to collapse that or make that clearer or connect those two a little bit better.
I guess I think the network is what's most important. And I think like other folks have said similar things. Like we have, just as an example, we have a street, Coburg Road in Eugene, probably has 27,000 ADT, and it has there's bike lanes on it, travel lane, 2 travel lanes each way, a center turn lane, and sometimes there's a planted median with turn pockets depending on the section. It's just not the kind of street that we're going to take an auto lane out, and the auto lanes are we've already narrowed them as much as we can to get to put more width to the bike lanes, but it's just we have some other streets that were much wider 5-lane arterials, and we were able to create buffered bike lanes and intend to eventually build protected, but Coburg Road, it's just not happening. So we've actually planned parallel routes, including on one side neighborhood greenways and the other side protected bike lanes. We've gotten a grant from the MPO to start building out the protected bike lanes on the parallel route, and I just don't see how we'd have to widen the right of way on Coburg Road, and there's lots of houses on small lots. So I think it would be helpful if the LCD gave jurisdictions a way to have exceptions to, in the conditions, and then we could just say we can't do this on Coburg Road, but here's what we're doing instead. Here's what the impacts would be of widening the right of way on the street. Also, too, when you're thinking of widening the right of way on a street like that, we'd love to have dedicated BRT lanes on that, or bus lanes on that street. We'd also like to widen the sidewalks. A lot of them are curbside. My priority would probably be, if I was going to widen the right of way, would be to set the sidewalks back. So sometimes there's competing needs for active transportation on these corridors too. And and I guess on that note too, like the section on pedestrians where it's saying you have to plan for wider sidewalks on collectors than local streets. A lot of collector streets, you wouldn't even know they're a collector street from looking at them compared to a local. So I don't think it's necessarily reasonable to say that collector streets should have something special. I think that should really be very context sensitive depending on the situation. Even like minor arterials, often they're just not super busy streets and in commercial areas. Some of them are in residential areas that aren't super busy in terms of the land uses. I mean, I think that the issue with wanting wider sidewalks is where there's going to be a lot of pedestrian activity, which isn't always the place where the vehicle traffic is. It can be. But it's really about where's the need for that because of the pedestrian generators, not because of the classification of what the street is. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that, Rob. Sarah.
Thanks. And like Elisa, I'm on in the category of folks who would like to see these things made stronger. And well, I hear the argument that there may be that they can feel too prescriptive. The fact is that we've been treating biking and walking and transit as nice to haves in the transportation system. Like Rob just said, something special, like something extra to be done when there's some extra space or some extra money. And I think what is clear is that the future requires to shift that perspective completely. Not only do climate and equity outcomes, if we think about traffic violence in this country and the fact that it's rapidly increasing and where the burden falls with that most heavily, it's not just those factors, it's just geometry. We're not going to be able to fit all of the driving that is being generated by the parking. We're not going to be able to fit it. You have to start making space for parking other things, for making it safe and convenient to get around other ways. We have to do that, and we have to do it now. So while I completely understand there's a lot of nuance here and tricky context, and there are exceptions, and maybe an arterial that runs along a freeway isn't a good place for a sidewalk on both sides. So I totally understand there's that need for nuance, but we can't lose boldness, and we need to add more boldness to this from the perspective that I'm bringing to the table, which is climate and equity and honestly geometry. So I guess we can't keep treating the current mode share like it's an inevitability for the future. The choices we make today determine the mode share of the future. So the mode share we need has to be biking, walking, and transit first, and we have to start building our landscapes for that. So I totally support bike parking requirements commensurate with required car parking. I think that totally makes sense. Getting around by bike is way more efficient of space and public resources than driving so that totally makes sense. And I will note there are bike lane sweepers available. There are solutions to these issues. We just have to generate the will to actually get to those solutions. And we're not going to get there if we just keep doing what we've been doing. So I just really want to underline, I am sensitive to the need to make this work, but also we have to be really bold. And I really need to see that. I really want to see that reflected in these rules. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. Steve, I think you were next.
Thank you. I have a broad range of comments, and I don't know where to start whatsoever. What I want to react to first is that you're hearing a lot of comments, and I don't want to discount any of those comments. I think those are all valid and important perspectives. But I'm going to say you're not hearing enough comments. I think there is a lack of practitioner involvement in this rule development. And while there are certainly a few of us here, there needs to be much broader engagement. And I'm using your language from the DLCD rules proposed, engagement there by practitioners. There's dozens of them in the metro area that are affected by this that are not here today. I don't know why. There are hundreds of them throughout the state that are important in that they'll be the ones that implement these rules. And if you don't bring the people that implement the rules in, you're going to struggle with implementing them. And I think what you have now in these modal plans is going to struggle with implementing these kinds of rules. So I think it's important, not just the number and volume of comments that you get, but that you get a broader perspective and who is commenting. The practitioners need to be involved, and we're not here. The other people in the metro area that would be affected by these rules are not here. One city is here today. The second thing is scheduling an hour to talk about 4 modal plans, and the requirements for all of them is absolutely. I scheduled 3 hours in my calendar just recognizing that the topic could be modal planning and beginning to talk about it. And then I realized, oh, it's only an hour meeting. Well, I can do something else in those times. But this is an unreasonably lacking in engagement process, and it needs to be substantially more. These are incredibly big changes to how we do planning in this area. So it's not just who's commenting, but how long we have to comment. And I hear this from the public all the time, and I sometimes agree and sometimes don't. But it's important here because we're setting the rules for how we have to do this. On the specifics, what you have in these rules for the transportation plan is related to what we call the road standards. And the road standards are developed by our engineering staff. They are independent of our plan. And the plan designates the appropriate amount of total right-of-way. How they use the right-of-way is up to the expertise of the engineering community. And they are involved in traffic safety. And we have a whole task force of engineers that design and require improvements to our transportation system. And making these requirements without their involvement is, I wouldn't even begin to have that as a discussion. I would be told, no, engineers make these decisions. The separated bicycling facilities that are required have the potential to be extraordinarily dangerous at driveways and other crossings if designed inappropriately. And if we're required to put in things that our engineering community is saying, no, we cannot stamp that, there is no way we can do it. They won't allow us to construct it. And therefore, what's it doing on the plan? Well, we have to put it on the plan because the TPR tells us to. Okay, but we're never going to build it because it's dangerous. You need to involve those communities in these discussions in order to have a reasonable framework of something that can be implemented.
So
I want to
yeah,
take another step and just say two things. I'm almost done. I'm
Okay.
sorry, but let me finish. I think the parking requirements are potentially very unreasonable, as Joseph said. The VMT rules in Section 800 appear to be problematic in many ways. I won't try to get into the details of those. One thing that I haven't heard is that these rules also require tree canopy rules. Washington County doesn't have tree canopy rules. We tried for 2 years to adopt tree canopy rules unsuccessfully. And now we're suddenly through the transportation plan going to be required to develop tree canopy rules. And I just found that just to be comical, honestly. So anyway, that's all I'm going to say. I'm going to leave it up to you guys to continue and listen. Thank you for the time.
Yeah, thank you for those comments, Steve. I will note on the engineering side, we have had folks, and Brian, you can tell me I'm how accurate I'm here. We have had folks on the engineering side of things look at the draft rules from ODOT, and frankly, the rules that you are seeing are substantially different based on their impact, on their feedback. So a lot of that has already happened. Absolutely happy to have conversations with local folks, but I will say on the other side, the comprehensive plan is what's supposed to guide all the actions of the local government, and it doesn't matter what department they're in, whether or not they're public works or not. It's the local comprehensive plan is supposed to guide that work, and absolutely everything has to be safe, 100%. But continuing a motor vehicle focused transportation system, which is what we've been doing for the last half century very successfully, is not going to cut it anymore, and we've got to make some changes, and that's what we're trying to do here in the rules. So I'm not saying we've got it 100% right or that we can't make changes, absolutely, but things are going to be different than they've been before, and that's
anything about the motor vehicle centric side of things whatsoever. I simply indicated that the rule process and potentially a number of the outcomes here are extremely troubling and problematic. That's all I said. I didn't try to indicate that how we should or shouldn't go. Frankly, that's a legislative decision that's outside of my field of expertise. My field of expertise here is developing transportation plans, and that's different than the I follow the community's direction and the legislative direction, not my own opinion. I work for the public.
Thank you, Carl.
Thanks. You've got an interesting task here, Bill. You've got to create more boldness and also, I think, provide flexibility in how to get there. Because I will say, as a practitioner, I mean, our current facilities, what we should have, probably not. But how do we get to a overall network that actually serves these modes good? I don't think a very prescribed approach is going to get us there ultimately. I think we need some flexibility in how we achieve that. I'm not saying that we don't need the boldness and the vision of what that ultimate network should be. In fact, I applaud the effort for that. So, and I guess in responding to what Steve said, I mean, there are a lot of places that have figured out how to design these things on the design standards, but I do agree that it's going to need work because I don't think our design standards are there yet. And so I hope that work is not lost. Probably a subsequent process. It shouldn't be in the rulemaking, in my opinion, but it should be something afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. Julie, I think you were next.
I guess this is playing on a lot of this other stuff, that a lot of this is very context sensitive. And so, at a transportation system planning level, at least in my experience, where we don't get down to the specifics, especially in a built environment of, how are you going to design, this particular enhanced bicycle facility that you want along this corridor in the TSP. That happens afterwards through refinement plans. And I know there's a provision in here for allowing refinement plans, but they have to be done within 5 years, which is really not a lot of time. And they are not allowed in climate-friendly areas. And so, what is the best protected bike facility to put on Union Street in Salem? What is the best facility on Commercial Street? We've had to do refinement planning to figure that out, given the built context. So I would hope that the requirements for a TSP recognize the level that you're at, which is, you're still up high, and you identify maybe where is the network that you're looking to refine. Because if we just simply say, we're going to have protected bike lanes along, I'm going to use Trade and Ferry Street through downtown Salem, which is Highway 22 freight route, and limited right of way with buildings right up against the sidewalk. It's never going to happen. I mean, okay, we'll put it in the plan. It means nothing. So I don't want to do that. I want to have an actual network that we can work towards building, and it be a bold network, but not just put stuff down just to say we have to do it, say it to meet the rule. Because we don't have much time left, I just want one very important point for me relating to the capacity increasing section of projects is I think that the inclusion of any increase in capacity for any existing collector or arterial street or highway or freeway is problematic to have included in that process, because that could mean, any safety project, we're adding a left turn lane because of safety issues. We're going to have to go through this, mini NEPA process. So I have sort of two concerns. One is I think that this should be very limited to general purpose travel lane expansions, so that there's no more than a handful that would fall into this, or new interchanges. But I think safety projects should be exempt. And I think the process itself needs to be scaled way back. I agree that there needs to be additional findings, but I think that this is, prescriptive process that takes several pages to lay out is too much. And I have more, but I'll be quiet for the moment.
Thank you, Julie. Joseph.
Hi, this is Joseph Off at the City of Hillsborough. I wanted to second what Steve was saying, and I'm just kind of looking at this as someone that I agree with the goals and objectives of what DLCD is trying to do. I guess what I'm looking at is that it's being too descriptive on these rules is and not allowing any form of flexibility. I mean, we can write the rules in a way that pushes cities and counties to do these objectives, but there's got to be some reasonable exceptions to give to them, because I'm looking at this and it's like, there's going to be cases where we just can't meet it, and I already feel like there's conflict in the rules, as I mentioned earlier, with the bicycle parking and wider sidewalks. That there's trying to fit both is going to be very challenging, and if we don't meet one, we're able to achieve one but not the other, then someone's going to sue us and not recognize that we're in constrained space. And so we need to have that some form of exceptions. I mean, we can push for these things, but we need to have some form of flexibility. I wanted to talk about sections 5052 and 6053. Both of them talk about crash analysis. It mentions that you need crash data for up to the base year of the TSP, and I just want to note that that's very challenging to do, because ODOT is 2 years in delaying and processing crash data. So there needs to be some flexibility with that. There's also something that talks about a crash reduction factor, And there needs to be more guidance on that because I don't really think FHWA clearinghouse that does the crash factors have certain ones that would address that part of the rule. I don't think they exist. And so I think we need to have, I'm an engineer, and then we need to have other engineers involved. I know you said they have ODOT engineers, but I'm not sure if they looked at that thoroughly, because that's going to be very difficult to achieve, especially if that's expected for every one of our city streets. I mean, that's just a lot to cover. So that's something to look into more. I agree what Julie was mentioning before about section 830. We need to have more time on that one. We need the LCD to dedicate an hour session on 830. But we're basically, if we do any type of things like a roundabout or a traffic signal improvement, that is considered a capacity improvement. And so that's where we're gonna have to do an extensive amount of analysis. And so I threw a suggestion to my management that who's going to be writing our comments, that I see that it should be a general purpose travel lane. I agree with Julie. I think that's what the intent of the rule is supposed to be, but not for small things like turn lanes or other type of safety improvements that can also count as capacity improvements. And then I don't know. I also wanted to throw out there about vehicle miles per travel. I know there's a lot of focus on that. Where there's some people are trying to correlate that with greenhouse gas emissions. And vehicle miles travel is based on the macro model. It's not a accurate number in any way whatsoever. It's supposed to be used as a comparative number. I mean, it's not. If you're trying to compare different land use scenarios to different land use scenarios to different projects, that's what you use BMT for. It's not a numerical, but it's and it's seeing more at this exercise, and that it's trying. They're trying to tie a correlation to that and greenhouse gas emissions, and and I'm a little nervous about that. I don't think that there's anything that scientifically back that up, but if there is, I'd be open to anyone provide that materials. But the research that I have seen so far, it's doesn't support that.
Yeah, thank you, Joseph, for all those comments. I will ask you a favor. If you could email me a follow-up a little bit about the bike and ped inventory, particularly around the crash data stuff that you were saying that we may not have all those pieces. If you could send me some of that, I'd appreciate that, because I've been trying to figure some of that out. We've run this by ODOT, and I think they're saying this is a lot too, but I think I'm really trying to dial that piece of it in, and I don't have all that information. So if you could help me with that, I appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, typically what we do is we do gap analysis, and we try to identify where those gaps are. And we also do like levels of traffic stress analysis to identify corridors that we would like to, like, oh, we just have a bike lane in this corridor. Let's make it but it's 55 miles per hour. Let's make it a separate. There's tools out there, I feel like, that we do on a TSP level. The crash is getting a little too detailed for a crash analysis. I mean, we can do try to find a way to do a more planning level crash analysis, but right now it's a little too detailed.
It would be helpful if you could follow up an email for me with some of the especially on the crash stuff, because that would be helpful for me in trying to dial that in the right way. Okay. Thank you. Sarah, I think you were next.
Thanks. I just wanted to say, an engineer's job is to solve problems, and that's really important. But I would say engineers have been driving transportation planning and implementation for quite a while now. And the voices that we're missing are the people who are getting around our communities right now without driving, and who are trying to get around our communities without driving. And their problems need to be solved, and jurisdictions are not solving them. And I know there's a lot of hard work, and I know a lot of you here in this room are doing a lot of hard work to try to make this better, but it's not enough, and we have to do a lot more. And so I would argue that these work groups need to be hearing from people who are trying to get around by biking and walking and transit in our communities, and talking about what they need. What are the factors that are making their lives really difficult? So that would be the voice I would say we're missing here. And so I don't know how to get there to a solution without being prescriptive. And I'm also very curious to learn more about why VMT is not accurate. So I'm looking forward to follow up from Joseph, because as we see this shift with California moving toward using VMT as a metric for transportation projects, I'm just curious about where the problems are with that as compared to sort of past practices. So I would be curious to learn more about that. Not here. Thanks.
Thank you, Sarah. Elisa.
Hi. Yeah, I guess I'm just going to follow up with what Sarah said. Also, I do actually think that the most important thing is having the connected network, the connected facilities of all the things. And there does need to be leeway on which streets are picked for this network and which ones maybe just don't make sense to put on a bike facility. But having cities have the leeway to do what they want to do now, like, has not worked in the past. Like, we don't have great bike networks now. So I don't think that having it just be completely open-ended and saying that cities can have leeway to do what they want, it hasn't worked in the past. And that's what the point of these rules are, in order to have a more prescriptive method, in order to have cities have more stronger standards. If we got to a place with these rules where we just had a connected bike facility across all of the cities that were a level of stress 1 as dictated by traffic and speed, then great. We don't, like, if that's what the end result is, then I don't actually really care how we get there in these rules and on which streets they are chosen in particular.
Great, thank you. Appreciate that comment. Paige.
Yeah, I think that we've talked about this a little bit before, but having a multimodal level of service tool that will help to facilitate the preparation for the capacity that's needed, that we're forecasting to be needed for width and safety accommodations for bicycles and pedestrians. As a planner, I look at the numbers of the forecasted use of bicycling as part of that mode portfolio, the mode split. We have numbers for transit, which has been extremely useful. We got those very early in the process, and I was able to calculate the number of buses that we would need to accommodate the number of passengers or trips that DLCD believes is necessary as one part of that mode portfolio. But we haven't really been given the numbers. And Brian, I know you've been on these conversations too. I think this sort of falls in your lap a little bit. But the numbers of bicycle trips per day out to our horizon year, the numbers of pedestrian trips per day out to the horizon year, and that helps to supply the planners and the engineers with the width and the quality of the facilities that we need to build. And once we have those numbers, we can then create this network, this new cross-section, these new cross-section concepts. Which streets will those be applied to accommodate the bicycle trips that we're forecasting will be on the system? The major pedestrian corridors, likely zero car, zero bus pedestrian corridors, where would those go to connect conveniently to all the different modes? And for transit, like I said, you've given us that, but I think those are going to be very heavy streets where you're seeing a bus potentially every 5 or 7 minutes in some of these larger cities to accommodate the ridership that you're expecting of us to provide. Once we have all of that, I think we can adequately plan and prepare and engineer this system that you're envisioning. But it's really difficult for us to have these conversations unless we have, that forecasted amount, that forecasted demand. So, again, a multimodal level of service planning, there's a lot of training that needs to happen behind that, a lot of tool building that needs to happen behind that. But that seems to still be missing from the conversation, at least with the materials and what's required to be used in your TSP. So I think that would solve a lot of problems, honestly.
Thank you for that, Paige. I appreciate that comment. I think Steve, you were next.
I'll be short. I just wanted to note that I don't disagree with many of the goals and objectives here at all. And as a matter of fact, I think Washington County's plan already addresses most, if not many, if not most, of these potential requirements. I mentioned that we need to bring the implementers of the plan involved in how the words are written here. It's not a disagreement about the ideas. Let's get beyond that. The sentiment of, hey, let's build a complete multimodal system has been something I've worked towards my whole career. That's not the sentiment. It's how the words are written in these requirements, and how can we develop a plan that's frankly legally defensible when we go forward to implement, to adopt the plan that the community wants. We've had separated bicycle facilities as part of Washington County's plan for 7 years now, and frankly, many of the other goals are included in our plan in perhaps a little bit different way. And so it's not the goals, it's the people involved in how these words are put together and written, such that we can respond, such that the practitioners can respond to them appropriately and actually put plans on the ground that can be implemented, adopted and implemented. And right now, I think there's just so much here and needs a lot more wading through it. I had another point that I was going to make, but interest of time, I'll let it go for now.
Thank you, Steve. Rob.
Yeah, this will be brief. I like Paige's suggestion of a multimodal level of service. However, we have yet to find a good tool that we think would work well in our city. And so that, I guess I would ask folks, if there's a good tool out there that you'd recommend using, please share that, because we just haven't found one. And I think, maybe level of service isn't the right terminology. I think we in the industry, we use that because that's what we do for motor vehicles, but it's more about the quality of the experience and that people feel safe and comfortable biking and walking on the facilities. So anyway, just wanted to share that thought.
Yeah, thank you. I know, with the state is working on tools. I know ODOT folks are working on that, and I'm sure Cody could spend another hour talking about all that stuff. So, but yeah, we are at noon, and I appreciate hearing the comments about the length of time, and frankly, it was a struggle to get all of these scheduled as is in this time frame. But I hear your comments, and if we're able to schedule a second one, which I would hope we can in the next month or so, that we'll have a little bit more time to explore some of these things, and that we'll have had a chance on the staff end to discuss some of these comments and bring back. There's some of these things that I know we're going to address when it comes to like the 830 thresholds and things like that. We're going to address that, and that's something we recognize and have heard, and we're going to fix those things. And there's other things here that I think we will as well. But in these rules in particular, so many of these have been developed in coordination with Department of Transportation and a lot of different folks over there, not just Brian. Brian's been doing the cat herding over there. So I need to be real careful about what I can and can't do here because we're working together as state agencies, and I want to make sure that we're working together moving forward. So appreciate all your time. It is noon. Go forward, have lunch, and I appreciate all your time, and thank you all for your feedback. And of course, please feel free to follow up with written comments if you would like. And of course, I myself or Cody or other folks on the call are available as well if you have questions or comments. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill.
Bye.